Climate change is no longer a distant threat. It is a present danger, disrupting lives and livelihoods across the globe. But the impacts of this crisis are not felt equally. While climate change affects everyone, it disproportionately impacts the most vulnerable among us, particularly women. This essay will explore the alarming connection between climate change and domestic violence, shedding light on a silent crisis amplified by a warming world. We live in a world where extreme weather events are becoming increasingly frequent and severe. From raging wildfires to devastating floods, these disasters leave a trail of destruction in their wake. But beyond the immediate physical damage, climate change is also exacerbating existing social inequalities, including gender-based violence. The urgency to address this issue cannot be overstated. As we grapple with the climate crisis, we must recognize and address the gendered impacts of climate change, ensuring that women are not left behind in the fight for a just and sustainable future. A groundbreaking study by University College London has provided compelling evidence of the link between climate change and violence against women. Published in the journal Science Advances, the study analyzed data from 19 countries across the global south, revealing a disturbing pattern. The researchers found a strong correlation between extreme weather events and incidents of intimate partner violence. This connection was particularly pronounced in countries with high levels of gender inequality, suggesting that climate change acts as a threat multiplier, exacerbating existing vulnerabilities. The UCL study is a wake-up call, urging us to confront the often overlooked consequences of climate change. By highlighting the link between extreme weather and violence against women, the study underscores the urgent need to integrate gender considerations into climate policy and disaster response. The UCL study found that specific types of climate shocks are particularly likely to trigger an increase in violence against women. These include storms and cyclones. The sudden onset of these events, coupled with displacement and loss of livelihoods, can heighten tensions within households, increasing the risk of violence. Floods often result in the destruction of homes and communities, leading to overcrowding in shelters and strained resources, which can escalate domestic violence. Prolonged periods of drought can lead to crop failure, food insecurity, and economic hardship, creating stress and conflict within families. These extreme weather events, often fueled by climate change, act as triggers, amplifying existing vulnerabilities and increasing the likelihood of violence against women. Understanding the specific types of climate shocks that contribute to increased violence is crucial for developing targeted interventions and support mechanisms for women at risk. The connection between climate change and domestic violence is complex. Studies point to key factors explaining why these events lead to increased violence. Economic stress is one of them. Climate shocks often result in the loss of livelihoods. This creates stress and tension within households. Food insecurity is another factor. Droughts and floods can devastate crops and livestock. Food insecurity drives domestic violence. Displacement and overcrowding also play a role. Extreme weather events displace communities. This lack of privacy can exacerbate domestic violence. The breakdown of social services is critical. Essential services may be overwhelmed, leaving women with limited options. These factors create an environment where violence is more likely. Addressing these drivers is essential for breaking the cycle of violence. Section 5. The Weight of Inequality, GDP and Patriarchy. The UCL study found that the link between climate change and domestic violence is particularly pronounced in countries with lower GDP per capita and higher levels of gender inequality. This finding highlights the crucial role of socioeconomic factors in exacerbating the risks faced by women. In many societies, women already face systemic disadvantages, including limited access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunities. These inequalities are often compounded by patriarchal norms that condone violence against women and restrict their autonomy. Climate change acts as a threat multiplier, intensifying these existing inequalities. When disaster strikes, women are often the hardest hit and the slowest to recover. They may lack the resources to rebuild their lives, face increased workloads, and have limited decision-making power within their households. Section 6. India, a case study in climate change and gender violence. India, with its diverse climate and vast population, provides a stark illustration of the link between climate change and violence against women. the country is highly vulnerable to extreme weather events, including floods, droughts, and heat waves, all of which are projected to worsen with climate change. Studies have shown a clear correlation between climate-related disasters and an increase in domestic violence cases in India. For instance, following the devastating 2013 Uttarakhand floods, there was a reported surge in cases of violence against women in relief camps and affected communities. The patriarchal norms prevalent in many parts of India exacerbate this issue. Women are often seen as subordinate to men and have limited control over their lives and resources. This power imbalance makes them more vulnerable to violence, particularly in times of stress and hardship. Section 7. Bangladesh, Cyclones, and the Shadow Pandemic. Bangladesh, situated on the low-lying delta of the Ganges and Brahmaputra rivers, is highly susceptible to the impacts of climate change, including rising sea levels and increasingly frequent and intense cyclones. Cyclone Aila, which struck Bangladesh in 2009, provides a harrowing example of how climate disasters can exacerbate violence against women. The cyclone caused widespread devastation, displacing millions and destroying homes, livelihoods, and infrastructure. In the aftermath of Aila, there was a reported surge in cases of domestic violence, sexual assault, and trafficking of women and girls. The breakdown of social structures, coupled with displacement and economic hardship, created a climate of impunity for perpetrators. The experience of Bangladesh underscores the urgent need to address the gendered impacts of climate change and integrate violence prevention into disaster preparedness and response efforts. Section 8. From Research to Action, Integrating Gender into Climate Policies. The growing body of evidence linking climate change to violence against women demands urgent action. Policymakers, governments, and international organizations must recognize this connection and take concrete steps to address it. Integrating a gender perspective into climate policies is paramount. This includes gender-sensitive disaster planning. Disaster preparedness and response plans must consider the specific needs and vulnerabilities of women, ensuring access to safe shelters, healthcare, and legal aid. Economic empowerment of women. Investing in women's economic empowerment, including access to education, training, and microfinance, can enhance their resilience to climate shocks and reduce their vulnerability to violence. Strengthening social protection. Social protection programs, such as cash transfers and food assistance, can provide a safety net for women and families facing economic hardship due to climate change, mitigating the risk of violence. By mainstreaming gender into climate action, we can create more effective and equitable solutions that benefit all members of society. Empowering women resilience at the forefront. Addressing climate change and violence against women requires a paradigm shift. Women are agents of change, not just victims. Empowering women is a strategic imperative. They play a transformative role in climate resilience. Women must have a seat at the table in decision-making. Their knowledge is invaluable for effective solutions. Supporting women-led organizations builds resilience. Promoting gender-transformative approaches is essential. Investing in women's leadership unlocks their potential. Section 10. A Call to Global Action, Recognizing an Interconnected World. The interconnected crises of climate change and violence against women demand a collective global response. No country or community is immune to the impacts of these challenges. International cooperation is essential for sharing knowledge and best practices. Countries can learn from each other's experiences in addressing the gendered impacts of climate change and developing effective interventions. Providing financial and technical assistance. Developed countries have a responsibility to support developing countries in their efforts to adapt to climate change and address gender inequality. Strengthening international legal frameworks. International agreements, such as the Paris Agreement on Climate Change and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, provide a framework for action. By working together, we can create a safer and more just world for all. Section 11. Conclusion. Towards a safer and just future for all. The link between climate change and violence against women is a stark reminder that the climate crisis is not just an environmental issue. It is a human rights issue. As the impacts of climate change intensify, so too will the risks faced by women and girls. Failing to address this intersection will have devastating consequences, undermining our efforts to create a sustainable and equitable future for all. We must act now to break the silence surrounding this issue, invest in women's empowerment, and integrate gender considerations into all aspects of climate action. Our